What is the strangest mystery that is still unsolved? Story 1. I remember seeing a video about a woman that after getting divorced started getting stalked and assaulted in her own house. Every time police would arrive, no one more than her was at the scene. Sometimes she would appear with bruises. Once she appeared with a screwdriver through her hand. This happened so many times that police started ignoring her calls after the investigation on her husband and on the case left no suspects. 3 months later, she disappeared just to reappear next to a highway in the middle of the desert, miles away from her house, with her hands tied, dead. Autopsy later. Confirmed she was beaten to passing. Creepiest shoot I know edit. The case is the passing of Cindy James. Some of the details are different, but it's all detailed there. Story 2. The Oakville Blob. In 1994, there was a rainstorm in Oakville, WA. Only the raindrops were a strange clear substance that had the consistency of Jell-O. Lots of people experienced flu-like symptoms after coming into contact with it, and people's dogs and cats all over the city were dying. When a local hospital ran a lab test on the substance after one of the patients suggested it, it was found that whatever this mysterious rain was, it had human white blood cells in it. Sometime after that, a sample was also sent to the Washington State Health Laboratory, where it was being researched by epidemiologist Mike McDowell. After he determined that it was man-made and speculated that it was some sort of matrix for transporting viruses bacteria, the samples suddenly went missing from the containment facility, and his supervisor told him not to ask any questions. There are no known samples of the stuff anywhere today, despite being sent to several different facilities by various Oakville residents. So, yeah, I'd personally say that this was clearly some sort of bioweapon test run, but by whom? I'd like to give the US government the benefit of the doubt here and assume it wasn't us testing something like that on our own citizens. But if it wasn't, why would it have been covered up like that? And you'd think an event like this would be a lot less obscure. Also, even if it being a bioweapon seems super obvious, how the heck did whoever dispersed it manage to make it rain over an entire city for several days? Answer: you give them too much credit. There have been several incidents that have come to light in the last few years or decades that involve the US Government directly testing weapons and/or medicine on the unwitting and unsuspecting populace. Operation Sea Spray in San Francisco comes to mind. Also, they did something similar in the Chicago subways at some point. Also Shad, where they sprayed toxic substances on ships with thousands of unprepared sailors on board. Edit. Wikipedia has an amazing list of the known bullshit the US Gov has pulled in this similar fashion. Story 3. This dude got lost in the catacombs, and they found camera footage of his journey. But at some point he drops the camera and just starts to run. As far as I know, nobody has found out WTF happened to him. Story 4. The Circleville Letters. In 1976, residents of the small city south of Columbus, Ohio, began receiving handwritten sinister and graphic letters. Each letter included secret and dark details about their personal lives. One resident received a ton of letters accusing her of various unsavory acts. The author warned the resident that he had been keeping an eye on her home, as well as her comings and goings. The resident was horrified and tried to keep the letters a secret until her husband began receiving them. The attacks on the family continued, with large posters appearing around town spreading rumors about their 12-year-old child. One day in 1977, the husband left the house after receiving a call from who he thought was writing the letters. A few minutes later, the husband was found dead at the end of the street, dead behind the wheel. The sheriff had ruled it a homicide when he realized that a single shot had been fired before the accident, but there was no evidence that the husband was shot at the site. The sheriff found the husband was twice the legal limit and ruled it a tipsy driving accident. The letters began once again, this time accusing the sheriff of covering up the true nature of the passing. The letters also accused the sheriff of mishandling an investigation into the county coroner, who had been accused of other grotesque acts. The harassment continued, this time with signs along the road, and in 1983, the original resident who had been accused of having an affair pulled over to remove a sign. During the effort to remove the sign, she discovered a box was attached and inside of it was a small pistol. The gun was part of a booby trap designed to fire when the sign was removed. Paul Freshour was arrested and given 25 years. But one small problem: the letter. Writing continued even after Freshour was put in jail. In a new batch of letters, the author had promised to dig up the grave of a deceased baby and mail the bones to the police in the case of another potential affair turned takedown. Hundreds of residents continued to receive personal letters until 1994, when everything stopped. Story 5. An unsolved takedown of an entire family in Japan, which to this day remains unsolved despite DNA evidence indicating the ancestry of the killer, a sand sample left by the killer which was traced back to the California desert near Edwards AFB, and even sesame seeds in the killer's stool. Story 6. The Miyazawa family. Just listen to the Case File podcast on this and it has my mind blown. Someone entered the family home around 11:30 p.m., eliminate everyone, ate some ice cream, took a nap, pooped and didn't flush, changed clothes, and left like 8 hours after the crime. 20 years on and we don't know who or why. Story 7. On April 19, 1995, a truck bomb detonated outside the Alfred P. Murrah Federal Building in Oklahoma City, Oklahoma. The explosion eliminated 168 in what was the deadliest terrorist attack on the United States until 9/11. To date, it still remains the deadliest act of domestic terrorism in the country. One of the lesser-known things about this is the case of the missing leg. Investigators discovered the leg laying among the rubble and identified it belonging to Lake Shalevi. The only problem was she'd already been buried with both her legs. She was exhumed. Her severed leg was placed in her coffin, while the other leg was taken to the FBI laboratory for identification. Since it had been embalmed, a DNA sample was unable to be obtained. The extra left leg, which had been mistakenly buried with Levy, is suspected to belong to an unidentified 169th victim whose body had mostly disintegrated in the blast. This has led people to suspect there was an additional terrorist involved, even though perpetrators Timothy McVeigh and Terry Nichols had been convicted, with 2 others later identified as accomplices. So who was the possible additional bomber? They still remain unidentified now, 25 years after the attack. Answer: I remember this bombing so well due to all the coincidental connections I had with it. My uncle worked across the street in an office with a window view. He took that day off and his office was covered in glass from the explosion. His son was one of the federal marshals that escorted Timothy McVeigh back to OKC and fingerprinted him. My GF at the time was questioned by the FBI because she was buying dog food at the coop at approximately the same time they were buying the fertilizer for the bomb. Story 8. Perhaps not the absolute strangest, but in March of 2020, the Windows market share for the long discontinued Windows XP skyrocketed by about 10 in China. This spike in Windows XP used for just 1 month is for unknown reasons. Some people think the Chinese government could have been looking for security flaws in the operating system to take advantage of. After all, lots of sensitive government equipment still runs on Windows XP. Story 9. A strange but not creepy mystery. The disappearance and reappearance of Lawrence Joseph Bader. He was a cookware salesman from Akron, Ohio, who went missing in 1957. He went fishing, a storm hit, and his boat was found the next day with some damage. He was in debt and in trouble with the IRS, and his wife was about to have their third child. 4 days later, John Fritz Johnson appeared in a bar in Omaha, Nebraska. Spoiler, it's Larry Bader. Fritz was known for his wild personality. He attracted local attention for sitting atop a flagpole for 30 days to raise money for polio. He became a radio announcer and a TV sports director. He drove around in a hearse with a bar and became a minor celebrity in Omaha. By no means was avoiding attention. In 1964, a cancerous tumor was found behind his left eye, and it had to be removed. In 1965, Fritz was in Chicago for a tournament, and an acquaintance from Akron recognized him, despite the eye patch, and confronted him, and then brought Bader's niece to take a look. She agreed it was her uncle and confronted him about it as well. Fritz denied it, but found it humorous. Fritz's fingerprints were then matched to Larry Bader's military records. And it was confirmed. Fritz Johnson always maintained he had no memory of his former life as Larry Bader. Psychiatrists examined him and believed he was telling the truth, even though he had financial reasons to assume a new identity, and the concept of someone forgetting their past and entirely constructing a different one with false memories is hard to fathom. It is also considered a possibility that the eye tumor had something to do with it. He ultimately died in 1966 from the eye tumor, and it was never determined conclusively whether he was lying or not. I am fascinated by this case, especially because he had an entire change in personality, an entire life backstory as Fritz, and he made no effort to live a low profile to avoid discovery. I found this case while looking through the Wikipedia category of people who have faked their own deaths, though it's debatable if this guy should even be on there. All of which are great stories. Answer: this not the only case of this sort. Look up cases of dissociative fugue. Several people experience the exact same symptoms, becoming entirely different in personality in an extremely short time span. Some people in fugue states create an entirely new identity, with new names and memories, and some have no identity at all in the state. Sometimes they can snap out of it and remember who they are, commonly not really remembering who they were in the fugue state or what they did. Sometimes it's more difficult to convince the person otherwise. Definitely a very spooky occurrence and makes one question their own current identity. Story 10. The tragic end of Lavina Johnson, a black female U.S. Army private who was found shot to passing inside a burning tent with a broken nose, black eyes, broken teeth, violation, and acid burns on her genitals in July 2005. U.S. Army ruled her passing a tragic end. Story 11. Another one is Colonel Philip Shue's passing. On April 16, 2003, 54-year-old Colonel Philip Shue left his Texas home and headed to work. 2 hours later, he was found dead in his car, an apparent victim of a car crash. The car was caved in on the driver's side, and Philip suffered major head trauma as a result. He was eliminated instantly. This is where it gets weird. Philip had a tear in his t-shirt under his fatigues. There, they could see a 6-inch vertical gash in his chest. Above the entrance to the 6th gash were at least 5 scratch marks, which the autopsy report said were consistent with hesitant marks. Both his nipples had been removed with surgical precision. The 5th digit on his left hand had been amputated, and his left ear had been lacerated down to the bone. Duct tape was dangling from both of his wrists and the top of his boots. It was ruled a tragic end. Answer: sounds like he was tortured, likely for intelligence gathering purposes if he was a colonel. He then escaped being tortured, the duct tape still being on his wrist, then was eliminated in a crash by likely those who pursued him. Tragic end was presumably ruled to be the cause to prevent a media frenzy and an international affairs disaster or a domestic affairs disaster. My comment is likely wrong. Reintelligence, and it was the ex-wife for insurance proceeds that were still in her name. Story 12. Magdalena Zook, a Polish woman who died in Egypt. She had arranged a trip to Egypt at very short notice as a surprise for her partner. He didn't have a valid passport and couldn't get one on time, so she went alone. Almost immediately, she began to act incredibly erratic, but was being helped by a Polish-speaking Egyptian man at the hotel. The hotel didn't want her, the hospital turned her away, and when she tried to board an earlier flight home, she was not allowed to board because of her behavior. Eventually, she was admitted to hospital, but despite being restrained, managed to jump out of the window. The boyfriend had arranged a mutual friend to come get her, but he arrived to find her dead. This conversation with her boyfriend is one of the most disturbing things I've seen. There is evidence that the Egyptian man actually knew the boyfriend and theories that the boyfriend was somehow in on all this, which is all very bizarre considering she planned the trip without him even knowing. Story 13. The toxic passing of Gloria Ramirez. 23's people became ill due to her mere presence, and 5 were hospitalized. We have never worked out what happened. There's an episode of the Stuff You Should Know podcast that talks about it. About 8:15 p.m. On the evening of February 19, 1994, Ramirez, suffering from severe heart palpitations, was brought into the emergency department of Riverside General Hospital by paramedics. She was extremely confused and was suffering from tachycardia and Cheyne-Stokes respiration. The medical staff injected her with diazepam, midazolam, and lorazepam to sedate her. When it became clear that Ramirez was responding poorly to treatment, the staff tried to defibrillate her heart. At that point, several people saw an oily sheen covering Ramirez's body, and some noticed a fruity, garlic-like odor that they thought was coming from her mouth. A registered nurse named Susan Kane attempted to draw blood from Ramirez's arm and noticed an ammonia-like smell coming from the tube. She passed the syringe to Julie Gorczynski, a medical resident, who noticed manila-colored particles floating in the blood. At this point, Kane fainted and was removed from the room shortly. Thereafter, Gorczynski began to feel nauseated. Complaining that she was lightheaded, she left the trauma room and sat at a nurse's desk. A staff member asked her if she was okay, but before she could respond, she also fainted. Maureen Welch, a respiratory therapist who was assisting in the trauma room, was the third to pass out. The staff was then ordered to evacuate all emergency department patients to the parking lot outside the hospital. Overall, 23 people became ill and 5 were hospitalized. A skeleton crew stayed behind to stabilize Ramirez. At 8:50 p.m., after 45 minutes of CPR and defibrillation, Ramirez was pronounced dead from kidney failure related to her cancer. Story 14. 3 lighthouse workers with impeccable mustaches traveled to a remote island on December 7, 1900 for a lighthouse shift that should have lasted for 2 weeks. When a boat arrived to pick them up, they were gone. No trace of the bodies, and the lighthouse was strangely locked. Not only was the setting normal, meal ready to be served, but there was no fire in the fireplace, and the clock stopped. One of the men kept a log in a diary, and he said that the seas were rough one day, but when monitored it was actually calm. No one knows what happened to them. Source 2 skip to 443. Edit. The mustaches have nothing to do with the story at all. I just really like them. Answer. Freak wave, almost certainly. Been to Flannan. Lovely place. courtesy of a local fisherman who told me all about this mystery and, frankly, scared the living heck out of me. I'll share what he told me, most of which checks out with records of the time. During the search for those quite wonderful missing mustaches, the following was noted. 1. A box over 100 feet above sea level had been wave damaged, and iron railings at the same level had been bent. 2. The railway lines serving the lighthouse had been ripped out of their concrete settings. 3. And this is my favorite bit, there's a nearby cliff over 200 feet high. It was still there, but the grass on top of the cliff had been ripped away, for up to 30 feet back from the cliff edge, arguing that that was where the wave broke. The local view is that by freak chance, all the keepers were outside and below the 200 feet above sea level mark doing keeper stuff when they suddenly noticed it had gone dark and looked up just in time to see a wave over 200 feet high about to hit them. Probably had time to say something along the lines of, "Goodness gracious me, and now I'll never have time to finish that letter to Martha," and that would be it. Story 15. I will forever post about my great aunt when these come up. Where is Kimberly Langwell? She disappeared in 1999 in Beaumont, Texas. Her car was found in the parking lot of an Eckerd Substances store, but her purse and keys were missing. Her cell phone was inside. We all know she wouldn't have left her daughter Tiffany just like that. She loved her and loved life and those who surrounded her. Everyone who knew Kimberly loved her. She was the shining star on a dark night. If you have seen her alive, please call the police. I have posted her case below. Answer: Your great aunt was a beautiful woman. I'm sorry for your family's loss. On that Charlie Project page, it says, before her disappearance, Langwell told her sister to disbelieve it if she heard Langwell had committed tragic end. She said she might disappear and told her sister where to look for her remains. Foul play is suspected in Langwell's disappearance. She was employed at the Mobil oil refinery in Beaumont in 1999. Any idea as to why she told her sister those things? i.e., getting weird phone calls, abusive ex, etc. The place she told her sister to look for her remains has surely been looked at thoroughly, right? And did that place have anything to so with the oil refinery she worked at? If not, I wonder if the refinery was searched anyway. I'm reminded of Chris Watts and what he did to his children. On a slightly different note, have you or your family members ever browsed unidentified person cases? Probably not a very large chance of that panning out, but you never know. I recently read another case in Texas where a man found out about his sister's remains many years later after uploading his DNA test. Story 16. The Overtoun Bridge. It's a bridge in Scotland where dogs always unexplainably jump off. It's very strange and nobody knows for certain why they do this. Dogs who survived reportedly walked back up and jumped off again. They even had to put up a warning sign to keep your dog on a leash and to watch them. A lot of theories say maybe it's because of certain scents or animals down below, but most people have disagreed with this theory. It's fucking weird. Edit. In reality, I've done more research thanks to some comments, and it seems like people have romanticized this to make it creepier than it actually is. I don't know exactly what to believe since there's so much misinformation out there, but I'll just believe the articles who've done the most research for now. They say it was most likely not hundreds of dogs because they can't find reports of that many jumping off like the legend says. It was only around 6. So it's likely that I was misinformed like so many other people were, and it's not actually a huge phenomenon LOL. But it's still sad and a bit weird that 6 dogs jumped off. Story 17. The Salish Sea Feet, or the Mad Axemen of New Orleans. The Salish Sea Feet are the approximately 20 dismembered feet found in or around British Columbia or Washington, USA. The feet sometimes are found still inside of shoes. No one knows how they got there or where they came from. Over the course of the last 13 years, the authorities have ruled out foul play. The Mad Axeman of New Orleans ran rampant in 1918 and 1919. He'd take down 6 people, usually those of Italian descent, with axes or straight razors. In March of 1919, he sent a lengthy letter from Hottest Hell that was pretty nonsensical, but the most relevant paragraphs read, "Now, to be exact, at 12:15 earthly time, on next Tuesday night, I am going to pass over New Orleans. In my infinite mercy, I am going to make a little proposition to you people. Here it is. I am very fond of jazz music, and I swear by all the devils in the nether regions that every person shall be spared in whose home a jazz band is in full swing at the time I have just mentioned. If everyone has a jazz band going, well then, so much the better for you people. One thing is certain, and that is that some of your people who do not jazz it out, on that specific Tuesday night, if there be any, will get the axe." There were no takedown that night because every dance hall in NOLA was filled to capacity. Answer: I can clear up the feet thing. I'm a British Columbian, and I recently completed my education in forensic investigation. I asked 2 different professors, both former law enforcement officers, about it. 1. People die at sea, like, a lot. It's not at all rare or uncommon for people to die on ships. Every day or so, someone somewhere in the world falls off a ship, gets in a boat crash, or gets pulled out to sea. 2. One of the weakest joints in the body is the ankle. When a body decomposes at sea gets eaten, feet are going to come off. 3. Shoes float. 4. The currents in the Pacific Ocean push a lot of stuff into the BC coast. We get garbage from Japan over here pretty regularly. X200b, there's no real mystery. There was just a statistically improbable number of feet at one point in time, which got a bit of media attention. And now, every foot gets added to the count, so it sounds like a big deal. But if someone were to do a worldwide analysis of body parts found washed on shore, BC's number, while higher than average, wouldn't point to anything nefarious. Story 18. How a lower-class English woman became an important Egyptian scholar based on her memories from her supposed past life as an ancient Egyptian priestess. She actually described a garden in an ancient temple that was later discovered matching her description, and in the location she said it was. She knew things that hadn't been published before, and had been worshipping ancient Egyptian gods from the age of 3. Story 19. The whereabouts of the last Gestapo chief, Heinrich Müller. The last verified sighting of him was in Berlin, roughly 3 days before it fell. He had stated he knew full well what the Russians did to prisoners, and he had no intentions of being captured. As chief of the Gestapo, he more than likely had access to foreign documents as well as ways to replicate them. Both the CIA and the KGB spent time looking for him, but no trace has ever been found. Answer: South America, probably. That was the Nazi failsafe. Disappear and blend into the country. They think they found a chain of forts in Venezuela used by Nazi officials. Edit. Gang, I may have been thinking Argentina. Either way, I heard about this on a History Channel special, Hunting Hitler or something like that. As far as I know, it's somewhat speculative, but a possibility. Story 20. Hundreds of hackers have tried to solve the Cicada 3301 mystery to